think that our brothers in Mountain Lion will think about the same thing, hopefully. So, so that's everything. So thanks everybody for your attention, and yeah, that's it.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could go, maybe if you could go back to the slide that had the principles, I think.
Absolutely.
Thinking particularly about harvesting value, and it harkens back a little bit to the intellectual property. It seems to me that in conservation and in science in general, that for most of us anyway, the payoff won't have much to do with, financial rewards, not like, copywriting something or patenting something that you can then sell. It's, we're not in the, creating new seeds for Monsanto end of the science world. But that the payoff for us and the value we can harvest is in where we end up in that three-dimensional space of having influence on, the problems that interest us. And so I'm wondering if you've thought at all about how, how that principle might translate into our world, or is it something that we can worry about paying less attention to, or maybe we just need to pay attention to what that value is that we and collaborators would be harvesting?
Right. So I'm not sure I quite understand. So you're talking,
on your slide 30.
The value of...
Sorry. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Making sure all participants can harvest value. I imagine that the authors of the book are talking about making sure that there's something, financially remunerative to all the participants.
Right. Well, actually, no, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think that the point of this slide, and actually a point of some of the literature I've read, is that traditionally we've been thinking that financial payback is why people move forward. And when I was doing my research about private conservation areas and what motivates private landowners to conserve their land, a lot of it was saying that it's not necessarily the tax benefits, but a lot of the intrinsic value of saving the land for their grandchildren and their emotions. And so I think Clay Shirky points this out a lot more as well, is that what people get out of participating in these communities is varied depending on the person, and it's most often it's not financial value. A lot of times it's being a part of a community. A lot of times it's furthering one of their personal goals. So for a lot of our partners, it would be furthering the goal of biodiversity conservation.
Right, right. So I guess my question was, sounds as though we don't need to worry about that as much, at least financially, but we just make sure that we're defining or thinking about what the value is that would come out of these collaborations broadly enough so that our partners on the ground, our partners in the science community who are, helping with this together, collaborating on these projects would get what they see as value and not just a simple endpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a good point. That's true. And so let me throw a question out to everybody else. I think there's two questions. One is, I don't know if this is an appropriate forum for that, but one question is should we spend some time on the retreat talking about this, and if so, what are some of the parts? I mean, what are some aspects that people are interested in? Let me just throw that out there.
Well, this is Bo, and I guess a couple of comments. I mean, one is that, John, as you know, you and we've already talked about trying to take advantage of probably more specifically your LifeScape tool, the suite of model builder models that you've already assembled for us to tackle some questions about restoration, to tackle some questions about climate change. And it gets less to this type of wiki idea as much as, you and I are thinking about some pretty specific ecological questions. So I can envision lots of ways that we're going to take advantage of this tool specifically, but backing up and thinking a little more broadly about your idea of this, collaborative thinking, or the the wiki idea. Just as an example, I don't know if I've shared this with everyone else, but I mean, when I first met John, he had me, he showed me the presentation he gave, and then he decided to let me give it. And it's just a great example of the type of open and sharing environment that John's been talking about. So it forced me to learn a lot about it as a consequence, and now I feel like I've got a foothold for being able to apply it to some of my work. So it was just a great example of being able to open up what his PowerPoint was, and then have me assimilate into it. So it's a pretty useful approach.
Yeah, thanks. And actually, that sparks an idea, which is, moving forward, when we move forward with that discussion we had last week with Greg, and seeing how well we can apply this framework to climate change adaptation modeling and planning, what we might want to do is consider it kind of like a pilot project or a pilot study on the collaborative sharing and collaborative working, and maybe even just use it as what they say here in Wikinomics by Design, the final bullet, consider pilot projects to ease into new practices. So maybe you and I can just start moving forward in that realm, and maybe give a little bit of a report back to the group in November as far as how that is going and how it is, how shareable the project is, how much extra work it is, and things like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good line. And final thought is that it seems like there's two categories of work that or at least that I can envision in what you proposed. Kind of there's the nuts and bolts, using the tool, that your continuous benefit functions, your model builder tools, and those are something that those of us in CLA and others who do this type of analysis are really excited about. It seems like that's a little bit more of a nuts and bolts and kind of a manifestation of this pretty concrete, specific manifestation of this much broader idea that you're talking about of mobilizing a community and getting people to collectively think. Seems like those are two different tasks, in a sense, and that a lot of this, wiki approach to conservation depends on there being a critical mass, or at least I wonder if a certain number of participants in order for it to start to return benefits. Because it seems like that's a discretely different set of questions and engagements and communications than the elegant tool you built with the GIS.
Right. I think that's a good point. I think for the time being, I think we should just focus on the nuts and bolts, and just keep this other idea kind of in the back of our mind, would be my thought. I don't know, Spencer, if anybody else wants to add some comments to that.
Hey, John, this is Michelle in Boise, and I was wondering if you had any examples of how you have applied the tool, other than what you just showed in the El Dorado for us, but maybe where you've applied the tool. I don't know if you applied it in a collaborative fashion or not, or is that what you're really looking to do to expand into with this tool?
Yeah, no, both. I've applied it in a collaborative fashion, and I'm looking to, basically I'm just releasing it out there, hoping that other people would apply it in a collaborative fashion as well. So here's an example from South Africa, in which it was a bit more of a hierarchical framework, and we had our two major parties at the table. One was a government agency, and the other was a land trust. And the land trust had the money to buy the land, but not to manage it. So they were going to buy the land and hand it over to the government agency. And so they both had to be happy with outcome. And so that was the example that was the case that we used there. And so here's a few different screen grabs from it. I don't know if I have the final. Here's a final example of the map. All the areas in red were the properties that came up really high. High value for both organizations that were worth looking into in more detail and actually meeting with the landowner and moving forward with that. And it actually really helped with the building of the consensus between the two organizations. I mean, here's the consensus spread. Each site here is a property in the rank of how it was ranked by the two organizations. but then after through the process, it really tightened the rank up as far as how they were feeling as far as being on the same page. So
John, it seems like that kind of result, you can go back to your scatter diagrams,
yeah,
is or should be of particular interest to us because if I'm interpreting this right, it looks as though the collaboration clearly led to greater agreement about what to do. Is that correct?
right.
Exactly. Does the collaboration lead to better answers about what to do? I mean, so
yeah, that's
you can agree to be doing something that's, more or less foolish than what you might have done just based on the old school science itself.
right.
So does the left-hand chart represent both a better answer as well as a more happy answer for the participants?
In this case, I think it did, but I think that what you point out is a really, really important aspect of this multi-criteria modeling, especially if you're getting stakeholders engaged in trying to come to consensus about some of these weights. And so we have to be really critical if we do go down that road, be careful about how we design processes. A lot of times it's the higher level weights that I think should be defined by the stakeholder groups. But the lower level weights, when it really gets down to some of the nitty-gritty science, I think that needs to still be handled by scientists. And I thought I had a
This is a pretty good picture for thinking about that. So the ones down at the bottom also seem to be ones where dispute or politicization of the debate would be less of an issue. I mean, either you're you have particular vegetation, or you're so far from the core, or so far from a watershed, or you're not.
right.
And reasonable people might be off by a little bit, disagree by a little bit, but by and large it's going to be something that's fairly cut and dry. But where you're getting up to how important are those different attributes at the higher levels, that does seem to be where you want people to feel heard.
Right, exactly. And oftentimes those higher levels, there is no true scientific answer on how to weight them all. A lot of it has to do with the socioeconomic and political landscape. So, for instance, in this case, what I was just showing you was biodiversity value, and so it has composition and spatial context. But theoretically, the model can combine biodiversity value of a particular decision with the social value of that decision and the economic value of that decision and other things, such as ecosystem services, which are kind of in between a lot of those. And then when it comes to weighting between those and debating between those, you can make a real strong argument that there is no scientific definition of how all those should be weighted. It really boils down to your values. And I think by having all the stakeholders in the room that are going to be implementing these values, say the Forest Service and the logging industry and the far left environmental groups, and I don't know who else, the ORB people, by having them have a face-to-face discussion about these, you really kind of do work towards a common ground, and it's a form of consensus building. So then when you get to your final answer, it may not be the most optimal scientific action if your science is truly proving biodiversity, but that's the point, is that you're also looking at these other issues. So it's a little scary in the fact that it takes a little control out of the hands of scientists, but the research says that the outputs have a lot more probability of being implemented. So, yeah, so I think the short answer is that if you do it correctly, you have a good chance of building both consensus and a pretty good scientific answer as far as the components. And then when it comes to the value judgments, that's a whole other challenge. So I'll point out, too, while everybody's still on the line, that that Spencer and the what's the name of the team of the management team? They suggested that I give a more detailed presentation of this at the ecology meeting. That's on the 23rd, I believe. And so So that